In the next moment, you are aware of yourself sitting in the Montauk chair as if you had never left it. According to the clock on the wall, only a minute or two has passed. Or is it the next day? Very good. That's enough for now, says Trevor, her voice impassive, as if she is a schoolteacher telling you to put down your pencil at the end of a test. We'll break for lunch. You'll be eating here on level 4 with Mathew, and we'll resume afterward. By the way, you're not to mention anything you see or experience here to anyone else, including Mathew. Understood? Yes, you say, nodding. Still feeling slightly dizzy, you stand up carefully as Trevor takes your arm and helps you out of the chair. The level 4 dining hall seems more like a restaurant than a cafeteria. There are stained glass windows that appear to be lit by real sunlight. Of course, you know that's impossible since you are deep underground. But even so, just the idea that it looks like sunshine makes you feel a bit better. Waiting at a table, Mathew smiles and waves to you as you walk through the door. You quickly join him and find a large salad is waiting for you. How'd it go? Asks Mathew. I can't begin to describe what happened, but even if I could, I'm not allowed to talk about it. Sorry, you say, wishing more than anything that you could talk to Mathew and tell him everything. What kind of tests are they doing with you? Are you allowed to talk to me? Well, no one said I can't talk, says Mathew in a low voice. Thomas just sat there talking to me. He asked me questions about quantum physics and then out of nowhere asked if I'd been in an alternate reality or if I'd had a past experience that I couldn't explain. Really? That's weird, you say as you take a bite of your salad. Mathew nods. And then he asked if I knew that Earth is actually a virtual reality. What did you tell him? You ask, completely stunned. Well, I told him I was pretty sure that you and I had been in an alternate reality or a different dimension. Definitely something we couldn't explain. But here's the strange thing. When I said that I'd heard that Earth is a virtual reality, guess what he said? You shake your head. He said, prove it. Not like he didn't believe it. In fact, I think he believes that it's true. I don't know. Maybe he wants me to prove it to myself, says Mathew, shaking his head. That's crazy. Why would he ask you to explain something that's clearly impossible? You say, puzzled. Well, that's just it. I've been thinking about all this stuff, and I believe there's more proof that this is a game than there is proving that it's not. I don't understand. How could you possibly prove this is all a game? Well, to explain that, I'll have to give you a quick lesson in physics. You mean like before I've finished my salad? You say, laughing. I'm up for the challenge, says Mathew, grinning. Okay, first, I have a question for you. Can you tell me what visually obvious facts people believed in a few hundred years ago that are now known to be untrue? Well, people believed Earth was flat and stationary. Oh, and that the Earth was the center of the universe with the sun, stars, and planets orbiting around it. Right. But even though we know the truth today, isn't it still hard to conceive of the fact that the Earth rotates at 1,000 miles an hour and we're moving through space at 66,000 miles an hour? You nod. You never could remember those statistics, and they boggle your mind every time you hear them. I'm just pointing out how crazy the world is, because you're going to need an open mind for this next part. You do an informal salute and say, Okay, Mind open and ready. Mathew smiles and says,
Everything you see around you seems real and solid, right?
You nod.
But if you go down to the atomic level, the nucleus is the only solid part of the atom. Now get this. If you took all the nuclei of every person on the planet and put them together, it's the size of a grain of rice. And if you put together the nuclei of the entire planet, it's about the size of a sugar cube. And the distance from the nucleus to the electrons is proportionately the same distance as from the Earth to the stars. So everything that seems to be solid is actually 99.999% empty space.
Wow, you say, genuinely impressed.
You're not even finished with your salad yet, and it's already starting to sound like a virtual reality, right?
Says Mathew, laughing.
And here's what Einstein said. Matter is energy whose vibration has been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter.
Einstein said there's no matter, you say, finding it difficult to get your head wrapped around the idea.
Yeah, says Mathew, nodding. But wait, it gets better, he adds,
sounding like a salesman on an infomercial.
There was this experiment where scientists set up a camera to observe electrons, and they acted like particles. But when no equipment was used to observe the electrons, they acted like waves and particles simultaneously. And the only logical explanation the scientists could come up with was that the electrons somehow know when they're being watched.
Okay, that's really weird. How is that even possible? It's not like an electron can think. I mean, electrons are just pretty much pure energy, right? You say, narrowing your eyes. Oh, I bet I know what's coming, as if Mathew has been pulling your leg.
Really?
Yes. I bet you're going to tell me that not only are electrons smart enough to know they're being observed, they even know what you're thinking. To your surprise, Mathew ponders this for a moment.
For someone who has trouble understanding quantum mechanics, that's an excellent point.
Really? I was just kidding, you say, giggling.
I know, says Mathew, nodding vigorously. But you're right. If electrons have the intelligence to know they're being observed, why wouldn't they know what you're thinking? I never thought about it that way. My mind just stopped where the experiment stopped. But what you just said ties in perfectly with what Asha told us about our thoughts and feelings creating our experiences. But here's the thing. I thought she meant that our thoughts and feelings affect how we see things, like the way people perceive things differently. You know, like a farmer being happy when it rains while at the same time someone on a picnic is annoyed. Same event, different perception. But what if that isn't what Asha was talking about? What if she was talking about cause and effect? Physics has proven that energy has consciousness, and that consciousness is linked to our consciousness. And then it somehow responds to human intentions.
Wait a second. You said the electrons responded to intentions. I'm confused, you say, unconsciously chewing on your lower lip.
Oh, sorry. The intention part came up in a later experiment. You see, once the scientists knew that electrons were simultaneously acting as waves and particles, they discovered that whenever the electrons were being observed, They would show up according to the intentions of the person setting up the experiment. If the intention of the scientist was to see electrons as particles, the electrons would show up as particles. But if the intention was to see the electrons as waves, they showed up as waves.
So the electrons do know how to read your mind, you say, amazed. Do you think maybe the electrons are trying to communicate?
I don't know, but here's what I'm thinking. What if thoughts and feelings actually cause energy to slow down to the point that you can instantly see matter? You know, like things and people you see every day.
But what if some energy moves slowly and other energy moves fast, and that's just how it's always been?
You've heard of Einstein's theory of relativity, E equals mc squared?
You nod.
Well, that equation is saying that when matter moves at the speed of light squared, it turns into pure energy. So, if you think about it, the opposite must be true. When energy slows down enough, it appears as solid matter. And I think that energy has to be, well, not just intelligent, but what if energy is intelligence itself?
You mean like some big cosmic universal intelligence? You say incredulously.
Mathew looks at you a bit sheepishly and says with a quirky smile, "That's really weird, isn't it?"
"Well, it's a lot to get your head around, that's for sure," you say, trying to be supportive.
I know it sounds totally crazy, but think about it. Matter is energy whose vibration has been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. But Einstein never tells you what causes the energy to be lowered. What would cause energy to slow down? For there to be an effect, there has to be a cause. And remember how Asha said that every possibility already exists?
You nod, hoping you will be able to keep up with wherever Mathew is headed.
Well, it doesn't make sense if you're thinking about a game that has to be programmed in advance with every detail, down to a grain of sand, and you can play the game at any point in time throughout millions or billions of years. But if your thoughts and feelings cause energy to slow down and show you a world that matches your own beliefs and perceptions.
You mean like the game's prime directive? Thy will be done?
Yes. And that's how the game world could materialize while you're playing the game. And it's totally customized to you. It's your game,
says Mathew with subdued enthusiasm. Okay, so let me make sure I get what you're saying. So there's this universal intelligence that's everywhere, connects everything and is everything. And because energy responds intelligently to your thoughts and feelings, whatever you believe causes energy to slow down. And the effect is that you see what you believe. Is that right?
Basically, yes, says Mathew concisely. Amelia, I think quantum physics has accidentally tapped into the game program itself without realizing it. Of course, the scientists don't know it because they're all about proof. But really, think of how phenomenal that is. It would be like you playing a computer game, and then you discover your avatar can drill down through the earth right into the level of the program itself. And if you happen to understand programming, you could have your avatar go in and change the program itself. Then you could create and play any game you choose.
Slowly you say, "Okay, but how do you know what's real?"
Remember when you were talking to Asha about your avatar body and you asked, "Are you saying I'm not real?" Do you remember what she said?
Yeah, she said, "You are not your body."
Exactly. You're not the avatar on the screen. The avatar does what you tell it to. But think about it in terms of the game. If you are not your body, then your thoughts can't come from your brain.
But where do my thoughts come from if it's not from my brain?
Are you the thought or the thinker?
Says Mathew slowly. Well, I guess I'm the thinker, you say, feeling a bit lost.
If you are not your body or your mind, then you must be the one who has the body, the one who has the mind. Doesn't that imply consciousness? Remember Asha telling us that we are born into the game? If we're not bodies that have learned how to think and be intelligent, there's only one other choice. We would have to be consciousness, thought force, universal intelligence that has created a body.
As if he's been part of your conversation all along, Thomas walks up to the table and says,
"The 99.99% space you mentioned earlier is known as the unified field. Unified means coming together, which implies form. Field implies interest, thought. Unified field then is thought taking form, and this thought form shows up as your body and the world around you, otherwise known as the game. This so-called empty space is actually full of intelligence, and because it isn't in a physical form, it's also full of potential."
With a smile, Thomas says,
"Well done, Mathew."
Then looking at you congenially, he adds,
"I'll leave you to finish that salad."
As soon as Thomas is out of earshot, you lean toward Mathew and say, "How did he know what we were talking about?" Mathew shrugs and shakes his head. "Does he talk like that all the time?" Mathew whispers,
"Well, yes, he's a scientist, but he also says some really bizarre stuff."
"Like what?"
"Well, today we were talking about quantum mechanics and proving that Earth is a virtual reality. He just rambled on saying he knows the secret to how the program works and that nothing is good or bad from its own side. Everything is simply empty."
"Everything is empty? Do you think he's depressed?"
"No, he just talks like that,"
says Mathew, shrugging.
"I mean, he looks at me as if I'm supposed to understand, but I really don't."
You laugh, and looking past Mathew to the entrance of the restaurant, you wave your hand and say, "Trevor's waiting for me. I've got to go. Let me know if you hear any more Thomasisms."
"I will,"
says Mathew, laughing. Returning with Trevor to the lab, you once again sit in the Montauk chair.
The chair has multiple functions. It can function according to your ability to image events or timelines, but it can also be programmed to recognize a specific frequency that you might think of as a specific time, day, and place.
"So you chose the place I went to?" you say, trying to come up with the best possible questions, so Trevor will continue giving you answers.
"Not exactly," says Trevor. "You have your own frequency, and the chair can search out your frequency at different times in history.
What do you mean, different times in history? You say at a loss. Are you saying you believe in past lifetimes? And that I was seeing myself thousands of years ago? Trevor looks at you for a moment, as if measuring your capacity for mental comprehension. Then something in her face changes, and she says,
Do you know you're playing a game?